Well, while the panel's coming up, many of you know that the Army has tried very hard over the last couple of years to accelerate its acquisition processes. You'll hear the term agile acquisition being used, and contributing to that process is the network integration evaluation going on out at Fort Bliss, Texas. Many of the players up here at the table have been involved in the NIE. Many of your companies have been involved in NIE. And the purpose of this session is to update all of you on where that is headed, especially now in a cost-constrained environment. We've asked Brigadier General Retired Pete Palmer to be our moderator from the Edge Innovation Network at General Dynamics. The panel chair is Brigadier General Randy Dragon, who is, I guess, the owner-operator of the NIE on a daily basis, and then I'll let Pete introduce the rest of the panel. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, sir. Let me go ahead and introduce the rest of the panel. First of all, General Swan has introduced General Dragon, who is the commander at the Brigade Modernization Command, part of Arctic and TRADOC, and actually gets to have the fun of leading the NIE effort. Other panel members, Major General Duraco, the commanding general of United States Army Test and Evaluation. Major General Harry Green, Deputy for Acquisition and Systems Management for ASALT. And we also have industry members, Mr. Jeff Carpenter, who's the CEO for Ringtail Design, and Colonel Kathleen Conley, United States Air Force retired research staff member for the Institute for Defense Analysis. And lastly, Mr. Doug Metcalf, VP DRS Network and Imaging Systems Group. One admin note again, we have the question cards, fill those out, and then we'll pass those to the panel members for the answers at the end. Thank you.
Okay, if I can get the first slide, please. First, I want to thank AUSA for allowing us the opportunity to discuss the current state of the NIE and our way ahead. And I also want to thank our panel members for being here today. I got three major points that I'd like to make before I hit the specifics on these charts. First, we consider ourselves to be early in the evolution and maturity of the Agile process and the network integration evaluation. As you can see from this slide, the NIE is phase 5 of the 6 numbered phases, and which includes a 7th phase, phase 0, which is continuous. But this has only been going on for 21 months, and we started NIE 11.2 in May of 2011, so it's fairly young. We have conducted 4 NIEs since then. We've looked at 143 systems, and of those, if you're looking for statistics, 36 have been recommended for fielding or continued development, and of those 36, 24 have been funded. So the first point, again, is that we're young in the maturity and the evolutionary state of the NIE. The second is that we're making progress, and I would say that we're making progress along functional lines as well as integrating formal test and evaluations into the overall network integration evaluation. We have seen progress from into a tactically deployable digital network, mission command on the move capability, our ability to extend the network down to the soldier level, and then we've made progress along the lines of convergence, and that would be applications convergence, where we have a number of applications that may be redundant, transport convergence, where we've got the ability now to potentially work over the same pipe for multiple levels of security, and then network operations convergence, and that has been a major push to the NIE. And then the third point, I think in order to achieve true agility, which this is the Agile Capabilities Lifecycle process, we've got to transform our culture in the way that we look at things. So Agile test and evaluation, Agile acquisition procedures, Agile fiscal decisions and capability will all provide further credence to this process. So you're looking at the Agile process. Again, the NIE, for a point of reference, is phase 5 of this process. And we, as a triad, which the 3 uniform members up here form, are operating essentially on this a timeline associated with these phases every 6 months. Next. Okay. If now we look at what progress we've made over time, I will tell you that we've been able to, our significant findings are that we've been able to purchase limited quantities of industry capability. We've adjusted formal program of record requirements inside the TRADOC and ASALT community. We've established a capability set, in this case capability set 13, progressing to 14 and 15, in one place with the great soldiers of the 2nd Brigade, 1st Armored Division, putting that in motion. And then we believe that we've realized significant cost avoidance, and I will tell you, just looking at 11.2, we documented over $6 billion in cost avoidance or programs that were reduced or killed based on results that we achieved there. Now, what have we learned? In the process of doing this, we've learned that we've got to put things in the lab before we get them into soldiers' hands in the field. And so, under the auspices of the ASALT at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, they have started lab-based risk reduction there. We know we've got to have AMC involvement, and so AMC has started to weigh in a bigger way during the NIE. And so we've seen them not only from a life cycle management standpoint, but also from a divestiture standpoint, what comes off the plate as you're adding new capability. And then we realize that, and what we've learned is we've got to train a system of systems. It's got to be a collective new equipment training strategy as opposed to individual systems. Go on to the next slide. If we look at capability, which is down the left side of this slide, and over the 4 NIEs that we've conducted, 11.2 to 13.1, with 13.2 coming, we've seen major progress in the soldier radio waveform, extending the network down to the soldier, mission command on the move, the ability to now extend the network and see a common picture in a number of places in the brigade footprint. And then we've seen progress in the upper tactical internet. Where we still remain challenged are with cross-domain solutions, the solutions between the unclassified and the classified realm. We remain challenged with a mid-tier radio, and we believe that capability is necessary, and we remain challenged with unit task reorganization, though we have made some progress there. And go on to the last slide. If we look at the way ahead, with 13.1 and 13.2, 13.1 just completed and 13.2 preparation ongoing, we are trying to set the stage for a joint and multinational effort in 14.2. And so we're looking across function at ISR, close air support, air-ground integration, interoperability to go to progress from 13.2, 14.1 to 14.2 with the major objectives of focused on joint entry operations and the joint network. So we anticipate that by 14.2 we'll be in a position to look at a number of those joint functions and we'll have set the stage through the series of NIEs that we have coming up. And that is it for my presentation, and I will pass it now to General Delarocca.
Well, good afternoon, folks. I have a series of charts that I'll quickly go through. One of the great things that have happened, and actually, can we go back to one of his charts? Because, let's go next one back. This chart, this is a pretty powerful chart. And what you see here is a lot of integration, a lot of maturing of systems. Where? Stateside, not on the battlefield. We've taken that burden away from the warfighter. We've not saddled him with it. And through the leadership of BMC, and ASALT, and industry, we've gotten a lot of integration that has really happened stateside, and it's happened at an affordable price. The key thing here, the FSRs are down at Fort Bliss, not in Afghanistan, not on a COP, not in Iraq. It happened here. So this is a powerful, powerful chart, and it's going in the right direction. It's going from red to green, And as we go through, and we're just starting on this stuff. This is huge. All right, my first chart, please. Next one. Okay. Folks, we have an Asia-Pacific scenario as part of what we have. How do we execute that? Okay, I'll say it, in a fiscally constrained environment. Well, the network allows us to do that. You take a NIE and you look at it and you put it in a joint context like 14.2, and what do you have? You can practice an Asia-Pacific scenario without even leaving the post-camper station. For instance, our simulations are so good now, 4th ID at Fort Carson can roll out the gate to the local training area, do home station training, and simulate they're in the Philippines. That's pretty powerful. You hook it up to the network, and what do you get? You can get onto a network, roll out a division TAC out its back gate, wherever it happens to be, roll up and hook up several brigades all at once. Have we done that? Only in time of war. And it's taken us a while to get there. So, we have an opportunity at low cost, not no cost, but low cost, leveraging existing funding, even after sequester. We're still going to train. So how do we do that cheaply? We use the CTCs, Fort Irwin, we go down to JRTC, we hook those things up, we do distributed testing, we hook it all into the network. And the network is what our society is built on right now. And this is how we're going to practice how we engage the next war. We do it stateside. So this gives us a footprint. The distance underneath doesn't care whether it's water or land. It's just distance. And if it's hooked into the network, it doesn't really care. So you have a wide expanse, distributed way of readiness, practicing, and raising our capabilities to fight the next war. Next chart. So what does that mean? That footprint. You take the footprint of NIE 13 and you put it anywhere in the world. Well, here's an Asia Pacific, if you look at it from a mission control standpoint, but it could apply any place else. We've got Africa. You think there's going to be some activity in there in the next few years? You bet. So we can have a regional aligned force, practice it, and the enabler here is the network. It's the network. We can do it at low cost, fight like we're going to in the future, and do it in that fashion. Next chart. Another way to look at it. Next chart. Okay, distributed testing. This is something that we're going to have to do more of. Routinely, when we did operational tests, we had small units, company, maybe a battalion once in a while, but our systems are becoming more complex. And what do we have to take advantage of? We have to take advantage of the existing budgets that are out there. Home station training. Our operational tests are going to have to be done where we can get the best affordable mix of troops, integration, evaluators, testers, all in the same area. We actually demonstrated that at 13-1 with Yuma, shooting Paladin PIM with 2-1 soldiers from Fort Bliss, manning the guns. They brought their own network through Win-Tiang-2, a little snap cell, SNE-SNEL, that went into Fort Bliss, and they got live action. It didn't care, the screen in the talk didn't care whether it was shooting at Fort Bliss or McGregor Range or any place else. This happened to be at Yuma. The only thing they didn't get is a reverberation of the cannon right there at that particular moment. But that's how powerful our simulations and our comms are. So we're going to be doing more of this as we go forward. It's the affordable way to do it. Next chart. Okay. Impacts. The maturity of it. We've been crawling. We're doing a little walking now with NIEs. And this is just the start of it. The OT&E, in their annual report to Congress, actually said some positive things. Not negative things, but actually they're warming up to it. The reason they're participating in it, they're helping shape it, and they can see the value of the NIE as it goes forward. And this is pretty powerful stuff. I'll let you read it. Next chart. Next chart. Oops, excuse me.
Well, you can keep briefing my sheet. You can probably do it
I
better
thought
than
that was my
I
last one. All right. Forget it. All right. Harry, it's all yours.
Thank you. My name's Harry Green. I'm the acquisition headquarters guy for today's panel. I do have one request of you. We're going to try and go through these fairly quickly so you get time for questions. Please ask some questions. You know, Gino and I aren't very good looking. It's going to be ugly for all of us.
Yeah.
Next slide. What I want to talk about up front is what lessons have we learned from doing 4 network integration evaluations, and we've only done 4. And this kind of builds on what Randy said. First of all, the NIE offers us an opportunity to evaluate the network incrementally. And that's really how we're going to do this as we leverage the changes in technology and programs coming online. They're not all going to come at once. They're going to come incrementally, and it gives us that opportunity to do it. Validated that incremental growth and capabilities works in order to get good enough out there. And you have an example in NetWarrior, which was tested in IoT and E and didn't look all that well. We restructured the program, brought it into NIE, and it's improved every time out. We like to think we've empowered industry to assist us in modernizing the Army by providing a venue where we can work together to experiment, refine requirements, and then have a venue to make procurement decisions going forward based on the gaps that we've identified in our capabilities. One of the big things we learned is we need to do integration and risk reduction in the laboratory before we take it out to a field environment. We've learned that lesson before. We went into the first NIE, we didn't do a lot of that. We've now added that in, and we see significant benefits because we're finding problems prior to getting to the hardest place to fix them, which is with soldiers in the field. We're starting now with the future NIEs, appointing a PM at the front end after we've decided what, thanks. Appointing a PM up front as we select those systems under evaluation to track the progress as it goes through the NIE, with the idea being that at the end of the NIE, if we have a success, we have somebody there who's already familiar with the product, understand how it fits in their portfolio, hopefully has some resources they can apply to it, and can immediately go to an acquisition strategy of either maturing the capability if it needs more, or putting in place an acquisition strategy to go get that capability. And the last one under lessons learned that I have in that upper left-hand box is we heard you. We understand. My boss came out of industry, came out of science and technology, that your internal research and development timeline requires that you look out a minimum of 12 to 24 months. So we're trying to give you more warning of where we're focusing and what we need, and looking at enduring requirements and gaps so that you can focus your IRAD toward what we're looking for. We think there's a lot of benefits to doing centralized integration, and that's what we talked to on the bottom left there. We really need to do integration in a .mil PF kind of environment where we're looking at all the enablers, not just the material, but we need all of those other pieces. So it forces the community together in an environment where soldiers are telling us what we did well and what we didn't do well, very graphically, very visually, very obviously. Next slide, please. So we're trying to make this part of our processes, part of how we conduct business. Part of that is thinking through how we use the NIE. And I would argue that we have different situations that we're using the NIE for. We're using it in some cases for programs of record that require an evaluation to support some kind of an acquisition decision. We're also using it to refine requirements, to experiment, where we're not quite sure what we want. We understand we have a capability gap, and we think we know, reaching out to industry, looking for your good ideas, and experimenting to refine the requirement. And then finally, where we really know what we want from previous experimentation, previous experience, and in those cases, we really need to look at doing this differently. It doesn't become a request to industry for sources sought, request for information. It really ought to be a request for proposal. So we've started that, and you see the first one is out to support 14.1. We know we need tactical routers. We're going to go buy them. We're going to use the NIE as a venue for testing both the lab-based risk reduction and the actual field testing. Those capabilities, make a decision at the end, and actually go procure things. We're posting that on FedBizOps, and it's out there now, and we'd encourage your participation, and we'll continue that as we go forward. Next slide, please. I know you can't read this. We've provided our slides. We also provided this at the last NIE Industry Day. But what we're trying to do is really look further out and give our industry partners more visibility to what it is we're using a particular NIE to look at so that you can focus your IRAD funds against that. And that was the point of this slide. Glad to provide it to anybody who's interested, or to have our member of the triad who works this, Colonel Rob Carpenter, meet with any of the interested companies who want to talk in more detail about what we're looking to go after in the various NIEs. And finally, 2 more slides. Next slide, please. Question that we've been asked many times over: have you bought anything out of the NIE? Yes, we have. On the left-hand side, systems that were classified as SUs or SUTs going through the process, and then other things that we bought, commodities that we bought to support the capability set we're going after on the right. The bottom line I would leave you with is we have bought as a result of participation in the NIE, and we intend to continue to build on that and to improve the processes to use the NIE to actually procure items for our Army. And one of the items up there, I'm going to do one more slide and then I'm going to pass it to him, is actually one of theirs, and that is small business. We really do want to use this ability to experiment and to procure using the NIE to get at the talent that is out there in small business. We understand our large industry partners. We have many relations with them. We buy many things from them. We're really trying to also get at the agile, innovative small company that really may have something to offer us. And we've had small business participation in all of the NIEs, and we're encouraging that. We had great turnout from small business at our last industry day, and we hope to continue that. And I hope that we make this work, that the gentleman next to me, Jeff, is going to tell you that it's a success story, and we're actually bringing in small business. So, Jeff?
Did you want to brief my slides then?
Well, Gino tried to brief mine.
We'll just pass it on. All right. Appreciate that. So, Ringtail Design. Ringtail Design is a small software company, so we're agile in a couple ways. One, we're extremely small. Two, we're software. So we have tighter turns and quicker iterations than a lot of these hardware production shops. So I won't read the slide to you, but our main focus is in technology transition, and we've done that several times over the past couple of years. Our real vision that kind of drives our company is that user adoption drives the success of any project. And that comes from a career where I've built and developed plenty of things in my past that have ended up on the shelf or holding up coffee cups for these soldiers, and we can't repeat that mistake. But if the soldiers pick it up and use it on a daily basis, that's really the goal that we have. So I was invited here to talk a little bit about our participation in NIE, and apparently we've been participating for 21 months. I've seen a variety of different aspects of the NIE. You can see there from 11.2, 12.2, 13.1, and 13.2. Under 11.2, we were supporting a program called CSDA. We were not a formal SU. We were a formal SU in 12.2, and then we were carried over into 13.1. And in 13.2, we're not issuing our capability to the brigade, but we are using one of our systems in General Dragon's ECC to help give SA on the exercise itself. So, been around for a while and seen a variety of different aspects. A couple quick slides about our capability, just in case you haven't heard. Next slide. We have a base core kind of software component called Replay. It allows you to plug in a variety of different data sources, whether they be live feeds or databases, customize the capability with a variety of different applications, and pull in a variety of different tile sets from different imagery servers. Next slide. This is a little bit about what the user interface looks like. We get a lot of great feedback from soldiers because it basically combines two concepts that they already understand. One is they all have an iPhone, smartphone, some sort of device like that. So it's an interactive touch system that you can walk up, touch, pinch and zoom the map, scroll around, almost zero training. And then the bottom section you see there is a DVR, which most of these guys and gals have at home already. So it brings in data and lets them rewind 30 seconds to 3 days and review the information, the intelligence, and the tracks for the vehicles and understand the situation very, very quickly. Next slide. Here it is in action. This is actually from new equipment training, net training, in one of the last NIEs. And I'll leave this slide up while I talk about the last few points I have. But you can see the guys in black shirts are from my team, and everyone else there is giving us very direct feedback of what they like and dislike about our system. And so I've been asked to kind of shed some light on the benefits and the challenges from a small business perspective. And one of the key benefits, really, from a small business perspective is the interaction that you get with some of these soldiers. It's really unprecedented. The ability to stand next to them, really understand how they think. You're not going to get user adoption of whatever capability you're developing without their input. General Walker said it yesterday, human factors should not be an afterthought when developing capabilities and planning them. And it's these types of exercises that give you that direct access into what these young guys and gals think and how they process information, and building systems to aid them in that. It also gives small businesses a great way to understand what will be required of them if their capability is fielded. And that's pretty eye-opening from a small business. A lot of you large businesses maybe understand that already, but from net training to IA, trouble tickets, it's an experience that you won't forget if you get a chance to participate, to really understand the bigger picture of how you plug in as a small business. And to gain an understanding, as was just mentioned, about the .mil-PF process, how the Army tests and evaluates systems. Too many of previous people that I worked with in my career, they're software developers who live in cubicle and report to a manager, and they never really get a sense of what the soldier goes through on a daily basis or what it takes to test and evaluate a system. And if they had that information, they would conduct their development very, very differently. And so we've sent our actual software developers on many occasions to this exercise, and they've come back enlightened, to say the least. In addition, another benefit is exposure, both to the Army and beyond. For the DV days, it's not just the Army that shows up. There are several other organizations, both international and from different branches, that show up, and you get exposure on what your system does and how it contributes from a variety of different folks. And that feedback is invaluable as well. So yeah, the process is young and it's improving and maturing. It's much clearer today than it was in 11.2 for a small business how to participate and what gates there are and how to improve. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to work with these soldiers. Without their experience and input, our system wouldn't be what it is today. Additionally, without General Dragon and General Hughes' recognition of our capability and SOCI's supplemental funding of it, we wouldn't have, our participation really would have been a little bit more lacking. We probably even would have gone broke, to be perfectly honest. It's a huge undertaking, and especially for a small business. So I also appreciate you, General Green, in kind of the open invitation to speak honestly about the challenges, because that's my next page.
Well, I'll be leaving now.
All right. So the first real challenge from a small business perspective, remember that, is that honestly some of the advantages of participating in the NIE are overshadowed by some of the challenges. And one of them is that as a small business you have very little control over exactly how you're going to participate, either to a limited extent or a full extent in the NIE, and it's something we'll have to address going forward. For instance, I know that a large percentage of the SUs in 13.2 have been relegated to either the APG lab or a demonstration capability. And if you're relegated to that role, simply in a lab demonstration, you don't get the advantages of interacting with the soldiers in the way that we were in previous NIE. So that has to remain a key aspect. And part of that is because the second challenge is we're trying to innovate over what is basically shifting sand. right? We're trying to innovate on top of an unfinished foundation. The concrete is still wet, and we're asked to, build a house on top of it. So we can't really expect as a community to test and evaluate WIN-T. At the same time, we're trying to test and evaluate systems that run on top of it. Small businesses will get pushed aside, and the large businesses, large programs will get the full attention. And that just takes away from our ability to do what we've been asked to do, which is innovate. The third, what I was going to say before your last slide, was that small businesses have little or no insight into what happens after being successful at the NIE. So we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of our system getting a recommendation for fielding. And until your last slide, I didn't know you had any interest in transitioning it. So
That's why I got to get a PM up front for all these things.
no, and so I wrote that down. I think that's really key to increase that communication. And I don't just say this for my own benefit. In Austin, we have a small business NIE support group. We meet over drinks on occasion. But I've talked to lots of different small businesses who've gone through this, and communication is a key. If it takes 12 or 18 months before a transition decision is made, that's one thing. But as has been mentioned in a couple of previous panels, the unknown is the hardest thing to plan for. So I fully support that new step to assign PMs early. I think if we had done that before, we would have avoided some of those miscommunications. So, and I think that bleeds into my last challenge, which is without measurable steps forward, without a defined path, it's very, very hard for businesses, large businesses as well as small, to quantify the opportunities and risks of participating. And the last thing we want to do is leave them with a bunch of unknowns. We want to quantify that, and we want to let them plan for what that ROI might be. Otherwise, we're going to have reduced participation in the future. So, anyway, thank you for this opportunity to talk about both the benefits and the challenges. I can go into more of those if you guys have questions. I have a lot more written down here, but for the moment, I'll turn it on to Colonel Connolly.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. So I'm from Institute for Defense Analysis, IDA, and I'm here to talk a little bit about NIE and how we see it as relevant to agility in general and command and control agility specifically. So to introduce that concept, you can ignore the slide for now. I'm kind of keying on something that Dr. Reggie Brothers talked to us about yesterday, where he cited the 2012 Defense Strategic Guidance that came out of the Comprehensive Review. And that called for, I'm quoting, investing in the training and equipment that makes our force agile and flexible and ready, close quote. So the first question I want to ask is, does the NIE enhance the agility and the adaptability of the force? And after visiting the NIE several times and reading everything we can find, I think we've come to the conclusion that the answer is yes. By extending the network to the individual soldier, I think it's been demonstrated that the force as a whole can better execute, at least there's an expectation, that it can better execute unified land operations, even in an increasingly complex and contested environment. So in fact, this belief is consistent with insights gleaned from the international command and control research community. You may not know there is such a community, but it's a group of academics and government and some operators that came up with the model that is on this slide. And it depicts a collection of command and control approaches that were identified as part of a NATO research effort. I don't know about you, but coming off the military, I didn't tend to think about command and control, my particular approach to command and control, as a variable. I thought when I came into a new unit, my first job was to figure out how did it work in that unit, not to maybe think about changing it. But I think it's useful to think about command and control approaches as something that we do choose, and that we can change, especially we've heard a lot of discussion about the last 12 years of war, and we've heard discussion about ad hoc changes. So if we're going to do it during wartime and we're going to do it ad hoc, it might be worth thinking about in advance and kind of preparing for it in advance. So I think just to acknowledge that these approaches already exist, they've all been applied at various times and places, and probably within the audience, many of us are familiar with each of them. So the idea of agility, though, is to either acquire or enhance the capability to change that command and control approach as a result of changes in the environment or the mission in order to gain or regain effectiveness. And I think this is particularly relevant in anti-access area denial and the contested cyberspace, et cetera, that we're all anticipating and some of us are experiencing. So where the NIE fits into this is that by enhancing the network, it's now possible to identify those changes in the environment more readily. And furthermore, a better network can help Army leaders shift their command and control approach more readily, depending on factors such as mission complexity, dynamics, and risk. Again, we talked about yesterday about changing from 12 years in the same fight to the full range of military operations. So that's going to be a very, very dynamic future. Another factor would be a degree of shared understanding. So General Cohn yesterday talked about his challenge is ensuring that subordinates have an even deeper understanding of intent in implementing mission command. Another factor would be the quality of the information available and how it is presented. So we heard a discussion about the current systems that we give our soldiers and airmen and sailors versus the iPads or the DVRs that they've had at home. And sometimes it's a little disappointing to them. And then another factor that would influence the choice of a command and control approach is trust, and we have talked about trust a little bit, but it goes directly to issues such as leader development that were discussed yesterday. So if we go to the next slide, most of you are also familiar with General Dempsey's 2012 white paper entitled Mission Command, which noted that the joint concept of mission command, which is decentralized execution based on mission type orders, is nothing new. But he went on to say it's not enough. Just that concept is not enough. And he again asserted that today's environment, with its complexity, uncertainty, and even its fiscal constraints, which we've heard a lot about, requires adaptable leaders at all levels. So he's saying that something needs to change. Even though we've been ad hoc, we've done amazing things, he's looking for something different. And so I think the NIE, in a way, points the way towards that something different. The question is, does the NIE in fact enhance mission command, as well as operational adaptability, which is outlined in the Army's capstone concept? Well, first, I think it might be helpful, as this slide does, to place mission command in the context of command and control approaches. And what it's intended to depict, this did not come from the International Command and Control Research Program, it came from us. But we think that mission command is consistent with a large subset of the total possible approaches. Not necessarily the most centralized, which would be down at the lower left as you're looking at it, or even the most fully decentralized. But we think it's in general, because we're talking about decentralization versus centralization, we think it's very consistent with that subset of approaches. And we think that the NIE enhances mission command because it provides access to a greater number of C2 approaches. For example, by enhancing information sharing or the ability to interact with other units or people on the network. It also enhances the agility of mission command by enabling shifts in the command and control approach, for example, in a denied or degraded environment. So now just a couple of thoughts about the future of the NIE, because that's the title of our panel, which I think is inextricably linked to agility and to mission command. Because the network is, after all, an enabler. So as it gets better, what more does it enable ground forces to do? So I think the first future trend is going to be that we'd be going from a service focus towards a joint focus. I think the NIE's operational context is likely to expand to become more joint, especially as, or maybe I should say if, other services and coalition partners can connect to the network themselves. With digital links, it is today and will be even more possible for ground forces to enhance their participation in Joint Force Commanders' processes, including nominating and executing dynamic targets. This can be demonstrated in upcoming joint training exercises. The second trend I would suggest is going from an implicitly agile capability to an explicitly agile one. It will feed both the agile acquisition process, implicitly increasing C2 agility, and we've talked a lot about that, but it will move towards C2 agility itself as an explicit capability of the joint force. And this is because C2 agility is in itself a capability with its .mil-PF components. You can think of it as a function of people, systems, organizations, and processes. And the network can enable all of them. In the cognitive domain, it can help people be more adaptable by presenting better operational pictures, like Jeff's system, and adding to sense making. It can provide systems that are resilient, even when they are under attack in a denied or degraded environment. It can enable organizations to shift from being supported to supporting, which is something that General Dempsey mentions. And it can assist in execution of current processes or suggest appropriate changes to those processes. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Hi, good afternoon. I'd like to talk a little bit about our experiences based on participation in 4 NIEs. We've had several hundred pieces of hardware, both standalone components and as completely integrated systems. And some of the things that we think that the future of the NIE may take into consideration to improve the process for both industry and for the government, because we do want to make sure that our soldiers are getting the best equipment available at an economically affordable rate. So in thinking about this, I concluded that maybe the future of the NIE could lie in its recent past. For those of you who've been NIE followers, you'll note that prior to NIE 12.1, there was a notion that came out that these were going to be called experiments, network integration experiments, which has a very distinct connotation about experimentation. And then when the NIE 12.1 sources saw it came out, they migrated from being called experiments to being referred to as exercises, which we know again has a very different context than experiments. And now in the most contemporary sense, it's being referred to as an evaluation. And I think the semantics are important of what we call it, and what I'm suggesting maybe in the future is that industry and the Army participation could be better if the Army were to do a little bit of all three. And let me explain why I think that industry needs that. So first off, industry wants to be able to do a few things to bound our investment. So first off, it's a matter of understanding the opportunity and understanding where it falls within Army priorities. I think right now the way the capability gaps are being published, they are being thoroughly vetted. We know that the G357 team's doing an excellent job of vetting them, but they're not really prioritized. And certainly there's no expectation or delineation over how they intend to field them and in what quantities, how many capability sets, and how many different BCTs or formations may benefit from fielding that capability, which makes it a little bit difficult when we get to looking at the investment costs, understanding what does it truly take to get through an NIE. You heard Jeff talk earlier about the overwhelming costs that you can be encountered with, especially if you're a small business. And so we understand what the tasks are, but you don't really quantify exactly what the investment costs are. And in order to take in what the opportunity and investment costs are, we really need to understand what's the path to acquisition. And I'm glad to hear, from General Green and others that the Army is making efforts to improve this dynamic, but to date, I'm commenting on some of the shortcomings, that there's no clear path to closure. The definition of a process, when you talk about agile process, is it's a series of actions or steps that are taken to achieve an end state. And in many cases, capability gaps are published, industry responds and participates, but there's no closure. They just disappear from the next source of sought There's no stated intent on whether it's going to be acquired or abandoned, so industry doesn't get the closure that they want. And what that makes it difficult to do, and what we're really striving to do, is we just simply want to get a supportable business case to warrant the level of investment that we are making to be competitive and bring innovative capabilities to the Army. I think the same would apply for programs of record, for that matter. So what I'm kind of surmising here is that maybe we do have a step that begins with an experiment. And as the Army is getting more advanced in replicating the steady state capability set baseline in the various labs at APG, within RDECOM, potentially globally, as General Delarocco indicated, that as that baseline is set, that maybe the Army could move to a BAA versus a sources sought. And what that would allow is for open enrollment, so that the Army would publish 24 to 30 months in advance of what it believes its capabilities are going to be, and industry could take a more measured approach to its degree of participation. The inherent shortcoming of the sources sought process right now is you find out the capability gaps essentially the same time that the sources sought is released. So you're trying to understand the capability gap, respond to the sources sought, and at the same time integrate the capability or the solution to meet the timeline for a very aggressive lab delivery. And so sometimes availability takes precedence over the best technologies. And if a BAA were to be open enrollment, we could then gauge how we would measure our participation. Key to all of that is iterative government feedback, that you don't progress to the next stage. In the current sources sought, there are decision points that are made. However, at the same time those decision points are being formulated, you're already delivering hardware out to Fort Bliss to begin integration so that the capability can be integrated and ready to participate in the exercise. So that implies a huge financial cost up front, and you're not able to capitalize on the feedback from what I would call the experimentation piece to incorporate any of those lessons learned before you go into your formal DOPML PF assessment. So the advantage, again, of doing that is that industry can decide when and if we want to pull the plug, or if we want to continue to improve a system. And likewise, the government, if they were applying the same methodology to programs of record, they could make decisions earlier about technology assessments of whether the given course of path of a program of record is on track, or whether maybe they ought to cut their losses early. So we think that what this will all do is give industry and the Army flexibility in how it invests into the NIE. Presuming then that you get through the experimentation phase of the program, then you would move into the evaluation. And what the evaluation would give you, dating myself a little bit, but the old Ernest and Julio Gallo ads that we will sell no wine before it's time, it prevents rushing immature technologies out to the NIE for integration to take up valuable resources that 21AD expends in testing all of this equipment and rendering evaluations. But it also doesn't create a single point of failure where if you aren't successful in the experimentation phase, that you miss the opportunity to participate. So you could iteratively go through the process. Similarly, it gives you the opportunity to say, we're not going to sell any wine after it's gone bad. So there's kind of a finite measurement in which industry and the government can evaluate how long they're willing to evaluate a technology in the experimentation phase before it maybe not be relevant to the capability gap. Then once it gets out there, this is where Jeff talked highly about the benefit that industry gets, as we get to leverage the vast experience of the brigade combat team that has probably more experience than anyone other than our brothers in the ATEC community on evaluating warfighting technology. It's probably fair to say that they have looked at a lot of different technologies that didn't meet their intended applications or live up to their promises. So they're probably kind of experts in knowing exactly what to look for, which simply gives you the ability to cut the chase. And after that evaluation, there ought to be a recommendation that comes out of that to field or no field. And that field or no field doesn't necessarily mean that the government's going to buy it, but what it does lead to is detailed government feedback. And if you don't like the detailed government feedback on your no field decision, it puts you back to the point again that you can decide when or if to pull the plug, or when or if you want to continue to improve your system. But the key point is there's got to be some finite closure to the exercise. If you allow everyone to continue indefinitely, then you end up with a situation where you got to ask yourself, do you really want technology, especially network technology, that could take 10 or more years to develop? I certainly wouldn't want to use the cell phone I had 10 years ago, the laptop I had 10 years ago, and I certainly don't want to be limited by the bandwidth that was available 10 years ago. So it could be a forcing function for getting through that step. Then presuming that you do get through that step, then the exercise portion kicks in. And again, this exercise would comprise those technologies that would only get a field recommendation, and then they go to validation by a brigade combat team that would be in the R4 Gen cycle. After all, that brigade combat team commander is going to be the user, and he's going to be required to deploy with the capability. So unlike my good friend Darby McNulty, who's had to do capability set fielding in theater, why not identify during the R4 Gen cycle and equip a brigade combat team who would be a patch on the deployment window and have it participate either in a combat training exercise, a home station FTX, or some type of validation, and let him then decide. Now, if there's multiple solutions that can be responsive to the capability gap, there's no inherent conflict in having several of those be evaluated. But the end state of that is that that brigade commander, just a technique, he could sign a joint emerging mission needs statement or not. And then that perhaps is what triggers a procurement and a fielding decision. The Army could then still comply with the DoD 5000 requirements, and they could compete among those capabilities that have made it through the evaluation process. And yet again, what that allows is the ability for industry then to say that we can invest, we can pull the plug, we missed a window, we're going to come back and take another opportunity at a following capability set baseline for similar capability. But what it really results to is that the industry, and I think the Army is very interested as a good partner to us, that we all want a clear path to true agile acquisition, and these are just a couple of the lessons learned that I would pass along and suggestions on the way that we might move forward in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Doug. As a matter of fact, we've got a series of questions here. I'm going to start out with one that we got from the live stream, and I'll go down the panel line because they're a good broad-based question to address, and it's actually a two-part question. And then we have some specific questions that was asked to specific panel members, and we'll address those next. The first one is, and this is for the Army panel members, what can industry do better to support the Army, the NIE, and future modernization?
Okay, well, I'll start. At the front of this, I believe that we, the Army, need to, as has been stated here, and actually Doug ended his briefing with it, we need to do a better job describing our future requirements to industry. And that's the bottom line. And what we need industry to do is help us to shape what's out there based on how we state those, what our requirements are. And so interactions like this and the dialogue that comes from it is important to us. Now, once a system comes in to the NIE, I would ask two things. One, that we're realistic about the support trail that's required for a system. In many cases, we may not have a good feel for what that support tail looks like, so that when it comes in, it's a little bit bigger than we initially projected. And the second thing is, from a soldier's perspective, that the training that we give these soldiers is more hands-on and less PowerPoint. And what I found is a logical progression in that direction. We've gotten better with hands-on training, but we need to continue to push.
Well, you know why we have lab-based risk reduction? And this is what I'm going to ask industry. Because some of the marketing claims in 11.2 weren't realized. We had a lot of claims, a lot of assertions that the system could do, and technology could do certain things, and it didn't happen. And it damn near broke the network. Well, it did several times. So I guess from an industry standpoint, your marketing claims, I got it, you're in business, you got to be competitive and all that, but when you come to lab-based risk reduction, it saves everybody time if you're realistic about what your performance actually is. And if you're not ready, don't show up, because frankly, you're going to be wasting your own money, we're going to be wasting the government time, and just be ready to come. And the performance that you advertise, make sure it's realistic. That's it.
So I would suggest a number of things, but the first thing I would suggest is that it's participation and dialogue. We don't know everything we don't know. we need your participation in the NIE because it enlightens us on the art of the possible. We also need to understand what's the art of the impossible or impractical and where we're missing the boat. Please provide us feedback. That's one of my charges to the folks that work NIE in ASALT is when we do an AAR, we should have an internal one, but we should also have an external one, and we should be getting industry's feedback. Two areas I would ask you to focus on. Number one, open standards. We don't want purely proprietary solutions that we're not going to be able to integrate. The I is integration. The world is changing. We took a lot of QRCs to fight the fight. As we look to the future is not one-of-a-kind standalone QRCs. So please work open standards and please work on your integration with others. We're going to provide a venue in which to do that. What we need is your help to actually make that a reality. The standalone system that has its own tail, its own unique hardware, software, field support is not going to do well.
So I'll agree with the statement earlier, hands-on training. That's certainly a huge benefit to both parties in this partnership. The LBRR certainly a key element. I agree, some industry claims just weren't realized. There were also some Army PM claims in 11.2 and follow-on NIEs that advertised their systems as setting a certain baseline, and as industry coming to then integrate on top of those, we have to be open kimono on both sides about what we're doing integration on top of. So my recommendation would be to find some way to make sure that the baseline systems are as stable as they can be so that the small and agile and innovative companies can show their best when they do show up. So Ringtail's been a part of a variety of other exercises besides this, some of them SF, some of them just helping a BCT at their Certex. But most of those where we've had lots of success, the network is stable, the systems are known, and they're asking for new innovative capabilities on top of that. And we've been able to turn around new capabilities in a matter of days. But it's only because that foundation is set. So that'd be my advice.
Jeff, yeah, you got a good point that PMs come with marketing claims too. And that's why we have independent testers.
Right.
We did it to ourselves. And that's why we have consumer reports, we have underwriters laboratory, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and it turns out that some systems don't live up to what they're...
Right. Well, on the industry side too, I mean, General Green had a good point. I mean, this is all about integration.
Yep.
So our system integrated with other industry systems as well as Army systems, and our system failed on occasion, and we can't just say not our fault. We have to work together as a team to make sure the entire thing works. So,
Let me, the second part of the question goes for the industry panel members. It says, what can the Army do to make the process more user-friendly for industry? I think, Doug, you covered a lot of good steps there as we went through. I want to add one other point based on a little side discussion we had before the panel. And having sat on both sides of the fence, both on the government side doing all the requirements and now from an industry perspective, you know, industry thinks different. The PIRs for industry are different for those that know what PIRs are different than those that they are for government. So our communication is not as clear as we would think it would be. I'll just say it that way. And we need to do it. But it also gets into the bureaucracy of how we do things. So, for example, the question asks, how do we make it better to understand the process? Well, if the agile process steps and discussions in the manual that tells you what the process is put FOUO, it's very tough to send out to people. It's one of those, you have to be working with the government and get clearance to be able to work with the government, okay? So lots of companies like Jeff's company, and I deal with hundreds of these smaller companies, technically, they can't even get this information to understand how to play because of how we've marked our slides and how we've marked our documents. So we need to understand to communicate to industry, and if you really want to get the I mean, the big companies are going to come talk to you, obviously, but companies like Jeff and the smaller companies that really can do these rapid innovation pieces, they don't get to come to the table or necessarily can afford to come to conferences like this. So we've got to think of how to do a better reach out to take advantage of all of industry that's out there and help us with our solutions. So I pass that up and open it to Doug or Jeff or Kathleen for any other comments on what the Army could do to make the process better.
Well, I would add that what General Green briefed is exactly what industry would be looking for. That's having that PM that becomes aligned with each one of the systems. When you make it through the lab-based risk reduction and you hit the decision point that's going to include you in the NIE, it's very helpful when there's a program of record that views you as a candidate enabler instead of a direct threat to them, because there's no incentive when industry technologies are a perceived threat to a POR when they could actually be a benefit. And I think the steps the Army's taking to remedy that are a very positive direction.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I think that's a huge, I remember a day in 12-2 where I remember thinking to myself, if I only had someone in uniform to stand up for my system, I could probably get some of these things answered, but I'm competing with the attention of a bank of people, all of which are from an Army PM. And it's sometimes you get drowned. So I really like that step.
I think it would be useful if the Army communicated to the innovators and the entrepreneurs, this is what we're interested in. We are looking for the ability to share information more broadly. We are looking for the ability to decentralize, to do mission command in a more decentralized or centralized. We are looking in these kind of degraded environments. I think it can even be done in a descriptive manner. It doesn't have to be technical specifications necessarily, but if there could be some, information going out there as to what is the priority, what are you looking for? We can kind of build the network in a number of different ways. We can enhance it in a number of different ways. What's the interest? What are the priorities? I think that would be helpful.
Okay, now we'll go to individual questions, and Doug, if we can start down at your end.
Okay. This first question is a two-part question. One is it asks if I'm satisfied with the procurement contracting outcomes of the NIE. And the second part of the question is, do you expect NIE to be a selection process leading to a procurement deal? I'll start by answering the second part by saying it should be. In this day and age, with the rapid progression of network technologies, I don't know why the government would take its limited resources that are even becoming more scarce and make selections to field capabilities based purely off of paper proposals. The NIE is a significant investment that provides an ideal venue for technologies to be evaluated as part of a procurement decision, and I think that it ought to be heavily leveraged for the capability that it brings. As far as whether I'm satisfied with the outcomes of the NIE procurement contracting or not, there haven't been that many. General Green did put up the list of those. I think that the potential was for more. If I look at, without naming a particular outcome, there's an ongoing competition that started a year ago with a source of sought capability that went through 2 different NIEs that finally resulted in RFP, and the selection process for that is another year. So if it takes 2 years to buy a relative commodity item, I'd say that's kind of lengthy in terms of the technology viability of networking gear, and I think that would be an area that the Army could probably accelerate and move a little faster on. There's probably some other components. I understand the Army's not going to have the budget to replace radios every 2 capability sets, but there are some things, low-end PCs, routers, things like that that are economically affordable that probably could be replaced at a much more rapid rate, and I think the Army could probably be moving a little faster to take advantage of the NIE to expedite that process.
Okay.
Is it to me?
I think it's the general. To you, Jeff, sorry.
Go ahead. The question I got was, how has the Army made it cheaper for smaller defense firms to offer equipment to be tested at the NIE? So to answer that, I'll be open kimono a little bit here. For NIE 12-2, Ringtail Design spent the equivalent of 50% of its annual revenue on supporting NIE. And I can't imagine a company like DRS doing something the same. So the impact on the smaller, as you go down that scale, the smaller, the larger the impact. So while I said earlier that the process is certainly maturing, the process also is getting larger. There's obviously the LBR, we've talked a lot about that, obviously very important. New equipment training and training packages and training materials, the amount of overhead that goes into status meetings is also growing. It's necessary, I understand that, but it's usually outside of the capacity of a small business. So for 12-2, we applied for supplemental funding from SOCI, and I don't know if a lot of small businesses know that that's available. Before I speak out of turn, is that still available? Okay, good. Because
Before sequestration, before the CR, yes.
today it is. Next month
Ask
we
me
don't
in 2
know.
weeks.
But I have talked to lots of small businesses who participated in many of the recent NIEs, and they did not know that that was available. So one thing, to step up our communication about that. But two, if you're a small business considering it, make sure you understand that. So back to the question, has it made it cheaper for us to participate? I don't know, but it certainly made it possible when it might not have been possible before. So again, if there's a small business out there considering it, please take the challenges that I listed to heart, and a couple other pieces of advice. Make sure to apply for that supplemental funding if you can. Leverage those DV days to interact with potential customers who are inside and outside of the Army. And you might consider starting by providing your capability to a larger business running under a PM or PEO instead of trying to run out there on your own.
Am I up, Pete?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How many you want me to do? Just one and then give it to the others and come back?
No, go ahead with those three.
Oh, gee, thanks. So I got half the questions then. Great. The first one I think ties to one that General Delarocco also has. Are 2 NIEs per year sustainable at projected funding levels? So I don't know what projected funding levels are. Let me tell you what I know based on the FY13 President's budget request and the expected FY14 President's budget request, which will go to the Hill sometime early next month. Yes. Now, I think you're going to see us refine this a little bit. The way the timing works out, you tend to have one big one and one little one just because of the timing of when they occur during the year. You get done with the .2 version in May, and you're back at it in the early fall. So there's less time between the .2 and the .1. I think we're working to put more refinement into tests for record, for programs of record and experiments and systems under evaluation, and try and refine that so one is more focused to that experimentation system under evaluation, and we separate it from the big systems under test, because Jeff is right, we had some challenges. We took WinT in there, and we wanted to have a controlled environment, and it was across the entire brigade. We learned some lessons the first time we took WinT there, which changed how we doing some things for 13-2. But from a resource perspective, the answer is yes. Now, let me answer the question that I think isn't on the card, which is the short-term question. What's going to happen with continuing resolution and sequestration? I'll take that a part at a time. First of all, for 13-2, I don't think it's going to have much, if any, impact. From an acquisition perspective, we've spent most of the money. Most of the integration is done or will be done by the 1st of March when the sequestration will hit or not. Certainly by the 27th of March when the continuing resolution runs out, we'll have done most of the work, expended most of the money, committed most of the money for NIE 13-2. What will happen with 14.1? If our resources stay where they are, we'll be okay. We'll take the cut that goes to every budget line in sequestration, and we'll move on. Now, I have to caveat that with, you're asking for us to explain a very complex situation, because right now we have 4 scenarios we're dealing with. We get sequestration and we have a year-long continuing resolution. We get neither, or we get one of each in the 2 combinations. I cannot tell you what will happen in all of those cases, but I think certainly 13.2 is good, 14.1 is crystal ball time, and we'll see what happens. Second part of this question is, why do it annually and align with PPBS process to sync outcomes and discussions with the POM and the budget? Certainly agree with the need to sync it with outcomes. I think our challenge is demand drives the need, first of all, and second of all, you want to give folks the opportunity to get in, and big systems under test could use up all of our bandwidth. So I will pass to General Delarocco and Randy, because I know they have pieces that tied to this, and then Pete, when you send it back to me, I'll do the other 2.
Okay.
Okay, says how will sequestration, this is coattail on the civilian workforce, talks about morale and how it will affect the NIE operations. Again, it depends on which of the 4 scenarios we get. There's some pretty interesting rules, dynamics that have come out in terms of how do you furlough civilian employees, and how the CR affects operations. It really depends on if what rule set is continued